Hey, happy Thursday morning to you, everyone. Welcome back. Appreciate you being with me so very, very much. And by the way, thank you so much for the wonderful comments that I've been receiving in response to this series. I know that I've been at this a good little while on 1 Corinthians chapter 15. But 1 Corinthians 15 is so grossly misunderstood by the great majority of people. It is essential for us to understand what Paul is drawing from, the context of his prophetic expectation. Now, pardon me, I have been examining the context of Isaiah 24 through 27. We could actually examine Isaiah 28 and 29 because they also contain prophecies of the resurrection. But for a little bit of brevity here, not too much, I want to shift gears. Not only did Paul quote from Isaiah 25, but he also quoted from Hosea 13 and 14. Now, it's really, really important for us to understand that the book of Hosea serves as an inclusio in 1 Corinthians 15. Now, what's an inclusio? In ancient Hebraic thought, in writing, a writer would introduce a quotation from a given text of the Old Testament. Later, he would give another citation, and his readers or his listeners were expected to understand that everything between those two quotations had a bearing on and was included in that speaker's thought. Now, why is that important? It is important because Paul begins his discussion of the resurrection in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 by citing, or I should say, alluding to Hosea chapter 6. Paul said, I delivered unto you, the Corinthians, the gospel, which you heard, which you received, which you obeyed, wherein also you stand, by which also you are saved, if you keep in memory what I delivered unto you, how that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, how that he was buried, how that he was raised again the third day according to the Scriptures. Well, guess what? Hosea chapter 6 says, on the third day, he will raise us up. We will live in his sight. It is almost universally admitted among conservative scholars that Paul is drawing from Hosea chapter 6, and that Christ is the representative of Israel. Israel is raised through Messiah. Through his resurrection is the only way that Israel would be raised. Now, that means that we have Hosea chapter 6 being cited and alluded to by Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 1 to 4. And then in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 54 to 56, Paul quotes from Hosea 13. That lets us know that Paul is including Hosea in basically the entirety of Hosea is in Paul's mind. Now, look, I've got to tell you, this is exciting, exciting stuff. I have produced a 30-lesson audio MP3 series on Hosea, the source of Paul's resurrection doctrine. I have adduced 22 direct parallels between Hosea and 1 Corinthians 15. 22 parallels, ladies and gentlemen. These are not accidental. They are not coincidental. It is more than obvious that Paul is drawing directly from Hosea. We already know that. But when we look at the direct parallels, it just drives home the point even more. that Hosea is a major source, and that when we look at Hosea, the nature and the time of the resurrection becomes irrefutable. Now, very, very quickly, I want to introduce to you 6 points, 3 points, 3 counterpoints from the book of Hosea that serves as Paul's source of resurrection. Hosea is about a living parable. As Yahweh had the prophet marry what he called a daughter of whoredoms. To that union were born 3 children. Those children, born obviously at different times, represented the progressive stages of Israel's apostasy from Yahweh. And it reached such a point that Yahweh said through Hosea, or to Hosea, say to your brethren, bring charges against your mother. Bring charges, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Let her put away her harlotries from her sight, and her adulteries from between her breast, lest I strip her naked and expose her as in the day she was born. God was married to Israel. Israel committed spiritual adultery. God divorced her. Now, here are the 3 points. Hosea breaks itself down beautifully into God's marriage, his divorce. So we will call it the divorcement, the departure, and the death. In Hosea 2, God divorced her. Write charges against her. That's the bill of divorcement. Number 2, Yahweh said in Hosea chapter 5, verse 14 and following, I will depart and I will return to my place until they repent. There's the departure. It's certainly not a physical departure. It is a covenantal departure. Yahweh abandoning Israel due to her sin. Point number 3, death. He said, I will tear her. I will tear her as a young lion tears his victim, and no one will recover. Hosea chapter 6, he has slain us with the words of his mouth. So what do we have? Divorce, departure, and death. Oh, but God is a gracious God. The Lord said that he would remarry her. Hosea chapter 2, 19 and following. In the last days, actually verse 18 and following, he said, I will make a covenant for her with the animals of the field, a covenant of peace. Covenant means marriage. Verse 19, the Lord promised that in the last days, I will betroth you to me again in righteousness. I will betroth you to me forever. Remarriage. Point number 2, the Lord said, I will return. I will depart until. And in Hosea chapter 6, he will come to us like the dew of the morning. And point number 3, resurrection. He will come to us. On the 3rd day, he will raise us up, and we will live in his sight. Beautiful, beautiful picture. We thus have in Hosea Paul's source for his resurrection doctrine. The nature of the resurrection. The death was not biological death. The departure was not of Yahweh literally, visibly, bodily departing. The death was not biological death. It was alienation from God, being sent into captivity. But Yahweh said he would make a new covenant with her. That's the remarriage. He would come to her by means of that marriage covenant, He would raise her up. Raise her up out of what? Oh, the dust, as we saw in Isaiah chapter 26, but it's not literal physical dust. It's a metaphor for alienation. It's a metaphor for spiritual death. He said, I will raise her up. They said, He will raise us up and we will live in His sight. Live in fellowship. Being given life through Messiah, the resurrection of Messiah who was raised the third day, just as Paul said. You see, Paul's source of resurrection doctrine, being Hosea, is a powerful, powerful refutation of the traditional view of resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15. Look, once again, you need to get a copy of my book, The Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2, Future or Fulfilled. I discuss Hosea in this book, and I demonstrate how we must understand it in order to understand 1 Corinthians 15. And yeah, we've got more on Hosea and 1 Corinthians 15, and we'll get to that next week. But in the meantime, again, get a copy of the book. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and order the book. Or go there and order my series, my DVD series on Hosea, Paul's source of resurrection doctrine. 30 lessons on Hosea showing where Paul got his resurrection doctrine. You can order that set off of my websites. Well, thank you again for joining me. Hope you have an absolutely fantastic weekend. We will see you tomorrow as we continue our review of Kenneth Gentry's book, Have We Missed the Second Coming? We'll see you on the flip side.